Welcome to SQL Handbook. My name is Shashain, and in this video, we're going to talk about what are primary keys in SQL databases. So to put it simply, a primary key is a constraint that we can use to uniquely identify a row in a table. We do that by applying the primary key either on a column or a set of columns. So that column or those set of columns become the primary key for that table. Now you might be wondering, why is it even important for us to be able to uniquely identify each row in a table? Like, what purpose does that serve? Well, the reason why we do it is so that we can ensure data integrity within the table. Because without a unique identifier, we are not able to distinguish between the different rows, right? And also having a unique identifier helps us prevent duplicates from coming into the table. There's no need for duplicates because now we know what column or set of columns uniquely identifies a row in that table. So any duplication of that column or set of columns would mean that those rows are a duplicate, and we don't want that. Now, as we are preventing duplicate records, we are preventing excessive storage and unnecessary storage going for unnecessary data. Also now, since we have a unique identifier, we're able to pinpoint what we want updated in the table or what we want deleted in the table specifically. And that is useful because we are able to prevent any accidental deletions or any accidental updates where we update rows that are not meant to be updated, right? And now, since we're able to uniquely identify a row, we're also able to use these primary keys as a way to build relationships with other tables that are in the database. That relationship building is something referred to as foreign keys as well. They go hand in hand, primary keys and foreign keys. I'll talk about foreign keys in another video, but for now, we're going to talk about primary keys. Okay, so that's why we have primary keys. That's the purpose of them. Now, as I said, in a simple terms, a primary key is a constraint that we can use to uniquely identify a row in a table, either using a column or a set of columns, right? And that becomes a primary key. Now, there's a few things I want us to keep in mind when we talk about primary keys. And that one of them is that they cannot contain null values, right? So primary keys cannot have a null value in them. Also, we have to know that one primary key per table. So every table can only have one primary key associated with it, okay? And that kind of makes sense. You can't have a concept of having multiple ways to uniquely identify a row in a table. You just want one way of doing that. Also, when you create a primary key, we automatically create a clustered index on that table. Now, you might not be aware of what a clustered index is. I will talk about that in a separate video, but just keep in mind that one of them is created when you create a primary key as well. And like I mentioned, we use primary keys to establish relationships between tables. All right, now we're going to go through a small demo of a few different examples I have here, how to create primary keys in different scenarios, and also how to pick a primary key in a table. So we'll start with that. So you can see over here I have a question that's posed to us that says, what should the primary key be on this table? Now this table is all the details. Let's have a quick look at it. So we have three columns: order ID, product ID, and quantity. Now, how do we know what should the primary key be in this table? Remember, a primary key is a column or a set of columns that we can uniquely identify a row, a single row in this table. Can we use order ID as the primary key for this table? Well, not really, because we can see that order ID has the same value multiple times, right? So there's 1001 over here, 1001 over here. 1002 is unique, but then 1003 is also duplicated as well. So we know that the primary key needs to be a unique identifier. So order ID will not fit that description by itself, right? Then we look at product ID. Product ID has 201, 202, 201, 203, 204. Again, it's not unique. So we're not able to use product ID by itself either. But if we were to combine order ID and product ID into the same key, as one key, then it will uniquely identify that row, right? Because there is no duplication of 1001 and 201 in any other row, right? And then we can use the order ID and the product ID together as the primary key for this table, right? That's what we call a compound key. A compound key is just essentially multiple columns that have been brought together to form a single key. And in this case, we're talking about a compound primary key. Okay, you can also have compound foreign keys, but again, foreign keys is a different topic. But in this case, we're talking about primary keys, and in this case, it would be a compound primary key. Okay, So let's start now with creating primary keys on tables, okay? So let's say we want to create a primary key on a table that's we're just creating now as well. So the table is a new table, hasn't been created yet. So we create a table, create table statement over here. The table is called employees test, and then we have the columns down here, employee ID, first name and last name, and then we have some data types for those columns. And then we want to make employee ID a primary key in this scenario. And for me to do that, I need to apply the keywords primary key after the data type of that column. So in this case, I just want one column to be the primary key. I put the word primary key after employee ID. And when I create this, that means employee ID will be my primary key in the employees test table. Okay? That's how you create it when you have a table that's newly been made. But what happens if I want to make multiple columns the primary key? Like the example I showed you earlier where we're making order ID and product ID. Let's say I wanted to make multiple columns of primary key when I'm creating a table. How would I do that? I've actually talked about that in this example over here. Create a table with composite primary key, right? Or compound primary key. You can exchange those words, compound and composite, it's fine. So that means a primary key that has more than one column, okay? And to do that in the creation table script, again, create table. This time I have a table called order details test, and then these are the columns in it. And then I put another comma after the last column, and I write primary key, and then I write order ID and product ID in brackets next to primary key. This is my way of telling the database that I want to make, oh, sorry, my mouse just went crazy there. I want to make order ID and product ID the primary key for this table order details test, right? That's how you do it for this scenario. But now what if I want to add a primary key to an existing table? So let's say you have a table already existing and you want to apply a primary key to it. How would you do that? Okay, so for this example, you can see on my left-hand side here, I have a database called class. And then in that class database, I have a few tables. Now, I'm going to create a new table for test purposes for this demonstration. I'm going to call it test. And it only has 3 columns over here. And it has integer, integer, integer for all data types. And for the first column, I've said that it's not null, right? Because I want to make this my primary key for this table, right? Now, you can see earlier, if I was doing a create statement, I would just put primary key right after this. So I would write over here, primary key. But in this scenario, we want it to be already existing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this table now, right? So create the table. And then I'm going to just refresh this tables tab. And you'll see test is now available over here, right? And if I expand the keys section and the indexes section, you'll see they're both empty. Okay, that's to be expected. Now, if I want to create a primary key on this table that's already created, the test table, what I have to do is I have to write alter table and then table name, which is test, add constraint, and then I give a constraint name. In this case, I just wrote pk underscore order ID. You can write whatever you like here. This is what I've done in my scenario. And then I've written primary key, open and close bracket, and in those open and close brackets, I've written order ID, which is the column I want to turn into a primary key, right? If I wanted to make product ID a column, a primary key as well, I would add that here too, right? But in this scenario, I'm just gonna make one column the primary key, okay? Just for this test purposes. So now I would run this. Cool, it's ran successfully. Now let me refresh test again. And now let me open the key section. Now you can see I have a primary key I made, which is my primary key that I just created over here, pk order ID. It's now there as well. And then you can see also in the indexes, I have a index created as well on it, and it's a clustered index, just like I said earlier, right? So like when you create a primary key on a table, automatically you create a clustered index as well. You can specify it to be a non-clustered index, but by default, it is a clustered index, okay? Something to keep in mind. Clustered indexes and non-clustered indexes, if you're not aware what those are, I will talk them more in detail in another video, but just understand that's what happens when you create a primary key for now. I hope that helps you guys understand primary keys a bit more, what they're used for and why they exist and how to make them. If you guys like the video, feel free to like it and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next video.